danger. He didn't need to speak. His companions had traveled far with him and knew what was expected of them. They all waited. By now the robbers were no more than 5 yards from the lip of the bluff, almost within reach of their goal. The man in buckskins nodded, almost casually, and 4 rifles spoke simultaneously, the weapons deliberately fired over the heads of the approaching men. The startled bandits paused, then turned and fled down the steep slope, sliding and stumbling, falling and scrambling as they raced to the safety of their waiting boat. Now it was the Indian's turn. He sent arrow after arrow toward the retreating men. The bandits saw the arrows dropping around them and increased their wild pace as they dragged their boat into the water and rowed off to safety. The man in buckskins listened, heard the fading sound of oars, and nodded. His companions turned and strolled back to their wagons for another hour of sleep. He and the Indian wrapped themselves in their respective blankets. Within a few minutes they had drifted back to sleep. The men, women, and children of the train were still asleep. Even those who had awakened briefly had mistaken the firearms volley for a crack of thunder. The wagon train was secure. As always, Kathy Van Isle looked lovely as she emerged from her wagon. Totally unaware of her beauty, she paused on the back step to tuck some stray strands of her long blonde hair under her sunbonnet, then tightened the sash of her dimity dress. She looked like a young girl in her teens, rather than a widow of 23. That air of innocence wasn't accidental. She had never been intimate with her elderly husband, Otto, a miserly farmer from Long Island, who had died in a raid on the wagon train. Kathy stepped down to the ground just as Whip Holt, the hired guide and wagon master of the Oregon-bound caravan, came into view. Tall and sinewy in his buckskins, he was armed, as usual, with a brace of pistols and a long bullwhip wrapped around his middle that gave him his name. His skin was leathery after years of exposure to the outdoors, and his eyes were hard. But when he saw Kathy, he grinned at her, and suddenly he looked younger than 29. She smiled at him in return, her heart skipping a beat. When Otto was alive, it had been necessary to conceal her interest in Whip, but all that had changed since the young mountain man rejoined the train, several weeks ago, as it moved westward across Missouri. Now she had no reason beyond her own sense of discretion to hide the way she felt. Certainly Whip made no secret of his own feelings. "Morning, ma'am," he called, sauntering toward her.
"You're wearing a new buckskin shirt and trousers, I see," she said politely.
He was surprised that she had noticed what he was wearing.
"Well, you know how it is. I get restless just sitting around Independence while we put in supplies and wait for the new folks joining us to show up. So one day I went hunting."
He cleared his throat awkwardly.
You look mighty nice, all dressed up for a day in the city."
Kathy couldn't help laughing. Certainly no one else in 1837 would dream of referring to the frontier town of Independence, Missouri as a city. One of the last great outposts of civilization east of the Great Plains, it was visited by trappers, hunters, and traders bringing their furs from the Rocky Mountains to the east. Now, with other wagon trains scheduled to follow Whip's caravan across the wilderness to the fertile Oregon country, Independence promised to develop into a major supply center.
"I told my sister I'd buy some things in town for her and bring them along tonight."
Only a few days earlier, Kathy's older sister, Claudia, had been married to Sam Brentwood, the former leader of the wagon train. The couple would remain in Independence to establish a supply depot, sponsored by Sam's mentors, former President of the United States Andrew Jackson, and John Jacob Astor, a fur baron and the leader of the group of wealthy businessmen who were encouraging the settling of the Oregon country.
"Claudia and Sam asked me to supper tonight, too,"
Whip said, and shifted in embarrassment.
I wasn't so sure I wanted to go, seeing as how I don't sit down at a table indoors very often. But if you're going, ma'am, I'd be happy to escort you."
"I'd like that,"
Kathy said. She smiled again before turning away, then added,
"I'm not really dressed up, you know. All I own are a few dresses like this, except for the old woolen things I wear on the trail."
"Could you use a doeskin dress, ma'am?"
"I'd love it, Whip."
Kathy hesitated.
"But I wouldn't want you to think I was hinting."
"No matter. Stalking horse," he said, referring to his close friend, a Cherokee scout, "has been pestering me to go hunting again, so I reckon I'll have some skins for you by the time we push."